Hi everyone, and welcome to our video on the signs of the trig functions. So it's all based on the quadrant that we're in. All right, so that's usually kind of the main focus, I think, but we're going to show one other way. So we know here's our quadrant one. So I just drew the unit circle. I'm going to kind of copy it to the left as well. Quadrant 2 to the left, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. Okay, and where we are based on the quadrant tells us the signs. So like if we're in quadrant 2 somewhere, we know that the x is negative and the y is positive. Okay, so and we could break it down for the other quadrants as well. Over here, this is just for the trig functions. I mean, which is based on those terminal points also. But the saying goes, all students take calculus, and the first letter in this phrase can maybe help with remembering the signs of the trig functions. So they're all positive in quadrant 1. All of them are positive. The S is for sine, so the sine function. And then automatically it's reciprocal, so also cosecant would be positive. Let's abbreviate positive. Positive in quadrant 2. All the others are negative. So the other 4 are negative. Okay, so that means the cosine, tangent, cotangent, and secant are negative. Okay, so let's mark that on here. The other 4 are negative. So I'll do that for this one, but that's what we would assume for the rest, how to break these down. Okay, so the t means your tangent of whatever. And your cotangent, again, the reciprocals automatically have the same sign. These would be positive. The other 4 would be negative. Okay, and again, it makes sense. If you're in quadrant 3, your x-coordinate and y-coordinate are both negative. So sine and cosine would be negative. Okay, and then the fourth quadrant, the calculus part is saying, well, cosine of whatever. And then again, automatically secant, those would be positive. And then the other 4 would be negative. Okay, so that's a way to help us try to remember the signs. Now, I usually just sketch out a circle like I did up in the top right to really verify, but it's whatever you want to do. Okay, so on this it says find the sign of the expression if the terminal point is in quadrant 2. Okay, so this is the way, so the saying's nice and all, but it's saying we're somewhere in quadrant 2, so we're somewhere over here. We don't know exactly, so that's why I'm just doing a really big dot. But I do know that x-coordinate is negative. And I would know the y-coordinate is positive in quadrant 2. Okay, so that means for this problem, find the signs. Well, they give a cosecant. We can change that, remember, or we can think of it as sine, since they have the same signs. But what I'm thinking of this problem, let's go ahead and change those cosecant of t, because I don't like cosecant of t. I'm going to do sine. And then it would be timesing cosine of t. And we could put a 1 over under it as a placeholder. And then cotangent of t, I'm going to write that as cosine of t over sine of t. Just to see sines and cosines only. And then that way, again, I can look at these and start to break it down using my unit circle or using the saying. If I'm in quadrant 2, I know that this is going to be positive because it's sine. Sine is connected to the y-coordinate. All right, so, and 1 doesn't impact the sign, so 1's automatically positive. I know the cosine part would be negative. And then down below, I have a cosine. That part's negative. And then I have a sine. That part is positive. Okay, so that means I'm just looking at the sign, so I'm multiplying and dividing these all together. Okay, so I have a positive and a negative and a positive all multiplied. Well, these two negatives would multiply to be a positive or divide to be a positive. And then the leftover positive times a positive times a positive, all of that is positive. Okay, so it's working with the rules for signs, so multiplying positives and negatives. Okay, so that is positive. Okay, if so that was doing it with the breakdown, with drawing out the circle and just thinking about the signs. If I'm using the all students take calculus phrase, um, then I would say, well, if I'm in quadrant 2, I know that my sine and cosecant are the only ones that are positive. So we could say this one for sure is positive. All the others are negative. Okay, so that means positive cosine would be negative, and then cotangent would be negative in quadrant 2. And it's the same breakdown, one positive and two negatives, multiply and divide, and still give us a positive value. Okay, so that's one of the things that we do with the signs of the trig functions. The other thing is figuring out, kind of going backwards and working to see what quadrant we would be in. So it says which quadrant is the terminal point in if, number one here, sine of t is negative and cosine of t is positive. All right, so the way that, again, I break these down, so sine of t is negative. All right, so again, I'm going to just draw my unit circle. If sine of t is negative, remember that's a y-coordinate. Sine of t is negative, y-coordinate. That's telling me I would be somewhere in quadrant 3 or quadrant 4. Okay, so that's that information. I'm going to keep that in the black ink. And then they're saying cosine of t is positive. Okay, so cosine of t is positive. That's x-coordinates. Cosine of t is positive in these two quadrants, so in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. Well, where the shadings are overlapping is where they both would be true. So this is a quadrant 4 answer. Okay, so where they're both true, that's this quadrant, is our answer. Okay, so sine is negative there and cosine is positive there in quadrant 4. Okay, and then one other. So this is just a different way to kind of state the words negative and positive. So if cosine of t is less than 0, this is saying cosine of t is negative. So if it's less than 0, it's a negative value. And then the cotangent of t being less than 0, cotangent of t less than 0 would mean cotangent of t is negative. Okay, so if something's less than 0, it's negative. If something's greater than 0, it'd be positive. Okay, so that's how we can break that down just if we wanted to. And we could work with number 1 in the same way if we wanted to use symbols instead. Okay, so like just to mark just the cosine. So this is the same as that. Cosine of t is greater than 0. Okay, anyway, what I would do again is I would still draw my unit circle. Okay, and then start to mark it. So cosine of t is negative. Well, cosine of t, those are x-coordinates. X-coordinates are negative to the left of the y-axis. So it's one of those two quadrants. And then cotangent of t being negative. Okay, so I'm marking that still in the blue. Cotangent of t being negative. Okay, so this is all students take calculus might help. It's not, so all students take calculus. Let's break that one down using this method. Okay, so all of them are positive in quadrant 1. Okay, so that's not cotangent then. Sine is the only one that's or sine and cosecant are the only two that are positive in quadrant 2. So that means cotangent is negative in quadrant 2. If tangent is positive in quadrant 3, so is cotangent. Cosine is positive in quadrant 4. The others are negative, except for secant. So that means cotangent of t is negative in these two quadrants. Okay, so and again, it's where they overlap is where the final answer would be, quadrant 2. Okay, so cosine and cotangent are both negative in quadrant 2. Okay, so that's it. So it's always one quadrant. So, or in these scenarios, it should always be one quadrant. So we can find it from their information. Okay, so that's it. That's our signs for now. Okay, so all students take calculus or draw out that little circle and think about the x and y coordinate signs, and both of them work the same way. Okay, that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.